Today we take a fascinating journey into the world of one of the most colorful and influential figures in history, Elizabeth I. This stunning queen is rightly regarded as one of England's greatest rulers, and her era has been called a true golden age. Elizabeth was not just a monarch, but a true leader who implemented crucial reforms and took her country to a whole new level. If Catherine II is a symbol of strength and progress for the Russians, the same icon for the British was Elizabeth I. She was the daughter of the scandalous Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, and the last of the Tudor dynasty. When Elizabeth came to the throne, the country was in turmoil and strife. But in just a few years, she was able to turn this weakened state into the powerful nation that many had dreamed of. However, the life of this queen is shrouded in mystery, and many myths and legends surround her personality. Have you ever wondered how one woman could change the course of history and become the symbol of an entire era? In today's video, we'll take a peek into her private life and discuss how her choices and character not only shaped her destiny, but the destiny of an entire nation. Are you ready? Let's get started. A daughter rejected by her father. Elizabeth I's life was full of unexpected twists and dramatic events. She was the daughter of Henry VIII, a king who dreamed of a boy heir to continue the Tudor dynasty. But as so often happens, fate decided otherwise. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, bore him only one daughter, Mary, and this led Henry to end the marriage and remarry. In order to carry out his plans, Henry had to bring about a reform of the Church, as the Catholic Church, representing the interests of the Pope, would not approve of the divorce. But Henry was not one to give up. He severed all ties with Catholicism and became head of the Church of England, essentially changing the religious landscape of England forever. Thus began the English Reformation, and soon Henry's marriage to Catherine was annulled. The king's new love, Anne Boleyn, again failed to give him his long-awaited son. Instead, she gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1533. Unfortunately, Anne's further pregnancies ended tragically, and soon Henry, deciding that the marriage was cursed, executed his second wife, leaving little Elizabeth in illegitimate status. Henry's next wife eventually gave him a son, Edward, but Catherine Parr, the king's last wife, proved to be kind and caring. Thanks to her, Elizabeth received an excellent education, mastered several languages, and became one of the most educated women of her time. She inherited her father's determined and strong character, which served her well on the throne. Interestingly, as a young girl, Elizabeth made a rather unusual statement for her time. She decided that she would never marry. In letters to her friend Robert Dudley, she claimed that her heart belonged only to England. Why did she make this decision? Opinions vary. Some believe that Elizabeth experienced unrequited love, while others suggest possible psychological trauma. Elizabeth often complained that she was born a woman, because in the Middle Ages that was a real challenge, especially for a queen. From time to time she referred to herself as a prince or monarch, like the Egyptian queen Hatshepsut, for example. This has led to rumors that she is actually a man. But these are just gossip. People have always needed mystery, mysticism, and secrecy. Elizabeth also used her feminine charm skillfully. Unlike her naive sister, Elizabeth knew exactly what men wanted from her. Instead of loose dresses, she wore tight outfits that accentuated all the advantages of her figure, and she did not forget to flirt, in addition to the usual diplomatic conversation. The reign of Mary I Tudor. Shortly before his death, Henry VIII finally recognized Elizabeth and her half-sister Mary as his legitimate daughters, but named Edward as his heir. Unfortunately, Henry died when Elizabeth was only 13, and this was the beginning of real turmoil for the whole country. Edward was a rather weak and sickly boy and sadly did not live long after his father. Upon his death, Jane Grey ascended the throne, but her reign lasted just over a week before she was overthrown by Mary, Henry VIII's eldest daughter. And so began the era known as Bloody Mary. This queen was determined to restore Catholic influence in England, and unfortunately she imprisoned her sister Elizabeth in the Tower, forcing her to renounce her Protestant faith. Elizabeth endured all the hardships, but made no concessions. It seemed that her life would be spent in confinement. But fate decided to reward Elizabeth for her steadfastness. Mary died leaving no heirs, and in 1558 the throne passed to her sister. By this time, England was celebrating the triumph of Protestant faith over Catholic terror. Despite this, Elizabeth had many opponents who stirred up religious strife in the country. Many remembered her mother, Anne Boleyn, who had been accused of treason. Nevertheless, Elizabeth I was crowned on the 15th of January, 1559. By then she was 25, a respectable age for the time. She realized that power could be fragile, so she surrounded herself with trustworthy people. As soon as Elizabeth ascended the throne, her advisors immediately began to insist that she should marry. It would strengthen her position. And the proposals were many. Many monarchs dreamed of marrying the Queen of England, but all were turned down. Interestingly, one of those who did not mind marrying Elizabeth was Ivan the Terrible himself. He was the only man with whom the Queen corresponded, and judging by the volume of letters that survive, they really did have a lot to talk about. Sadly, however, there was no mutual understanding. Although there is no reliable evidence of a marriage proposal from Ivan the Terrible, some historians believe that the Tsar did plan the marriage. It could have been a profitable move for Russia. However, according to the English nobleman Jerome Gauzy, the conflict was caused by the Tsar's physician, Eliseus Bamelia, who deceived the Tsar by assuring him that the Queen was young and quite available for marriage. Finally, when Ivan the Terrible realized that his hopes were not going to be fulfilled, his tone in his letter to Elizabeth changed dramatically and even became insulting. "We thought that you were the sovereign of your state, and that you yourself were the owner and caretaker of your sovereign honor and the good of the state. But it seems that you, in addition to yourself, own other people, and do not care about our sovereign heads and the honor and benefit of the country, but seek your own commercial profits. You, on the other hand, remain in your virginity like any mere virgin." Power on land and sea. The confrontation between Catholics and Protestants in England was a serious problem. The Queen should have taken sides, but her decision proved wiser. Elizabeth thought it would be better to balance these forces wisely, without inflaming the situation or allowing either group to turn against the monarch. Through many reforms, Elizabeth I was able to strengthen the state and turn England, which had been plagued by strife, into a powerful maritime power. After eliminating her rival for the throne, Mary Stuart, the Queen made Mary's son James her heir. It was he who completed the work begun by Elizabeth by uniting England and Scotland. But while many of the conflicts between the English and the Scots had been smoothed over, on the other side a no-nonsense confrontation unfolded. England and Spain, as two maritime powers, began to jostle for supremacy beyond the land. Loyal subjects of Elizabeth I became famous pirates, John Hawkins and Francis Drake. They successfully attacked Spanish ships and at the same time explored the sea lanes, opening new routes, which was extremely profitable for England. Of course, Elizabeth I can be condemned for patronizing pirates, but at the time it was normal for monarchs to do so. Thanks to the Queen, England wrested naval supremacy from Spain. Even when the famous Spanish Invincible Armada was built, the English were able to prove that they were far stronger. The Queen's loyal subjects defeated the invincible Spaniards. 2 weeks of bloody sea battles resulted in Spain losing more than 60 ships. The defeat of that invincible Armada forced the Spanish to retreat and admit defeat. And it was in this English triumph that the Queen's invaluable quality became apparent. She was able to choose a truly dedicated people, ready to serve her faithfully and loyally, and to give up nothing. The intimate secrets of the Virgin Queen. As for her private life, Elizabeth kept her promise not to marry. This did not mean, however, that the Queen did not have deep affections. Robert Dudley, who was Elizabeth's childhood friend, has received the most attention from biographers. It has even been suggested that the English monarch secretly bore him a son who was brought up in another family. From historical documents, we know that in 1561 the Queen suffered from an ailment that resembled a dropsy in the abdomen. Later the strange illness passed, but in her prayers Elizabeth repented of some sin she had committed. Despite many assumptions, it is still impossible to say whether there really was a certain Arthur Dudley, the Queen's son. There are also many who believe that the relationship between Elizabeth and Robert Dudley was purely platonic. Elizabeth I's activities. I have the body of a weak and frail woman, but I have the heart and courage of a king, the King of England. This is what Elizabeth I said about herself, and, it has to be said, she was right. During her reign there was an industrial revolution. And if before the manufacture of goods had been produced by small workshops, then on the Queen's initiative many factories were opened or acquired abroad. By 1577, the population's income was rising and the standard of living was improving. Elizabeth I encouraged the development of the arts and sciences. She did much to popularize and improve the English theatre. The Queen herself is known to have often acted in amateur productions. The royal troupe performed under her, including William Shakespeare. Giving up her personal weaknesses and desires, she devoted her life to the service of her country, in which she achieved incredible success. The decline of the Queen. Sadly, the last years of the Queen's life were bleak and hopeless. Despite political victories, Elizabeth suffered greatly from the loss of loved ones. The deaths of Robert Dudley and her loyal maid of honor, Catherine Howard, undermined her already fragile health. Elizabeth sank deeper into melancholy and her depressive episodes became deeper and more severe. The beautiful Elizabeth also suffered from the loss of her former attractiveness. Realizing that her face was no longer a source of admiration and awe, she tried to divert the attention of her subjects and court guests to her colorful clothes. As the Queen aged, she favored more unusual and even somewhat outrageous dresses. Unfortunately, none of these external effects could restore her former beauty and youth. Elizabeth, who had always been in good health, suddenly fell ill. On that damp and rainy day she caught a cold and decided it was time for a change of scenery. She went to Richmond to improve her health. Unfortunately, this was the moment when her physical decline began. Elizabeth, then 69, tried to spend more time in prayer. Most of her contacts were with Archbishop John Whitgift of Canterbury and Bishop William Warham of London, who encouraged her to think about God. Interestingly, it was during this time that Elizabeth asked for her coronation ring, a symbol of her connection to England, to be removed from her finger. It had become so embedded in her flesh that the Queen decided it was time to part with it. This was seen by many as a bad omen, for it seemed that by removing the ring her commitment to the country would also end, as if her marriage to England had been dissolved. Unfortunately, she was getting worse every day. Elizabeth had a sore throat and lost her appetite. Finally, she fell into a deeper melancholy and seemed to be tormented by a strange grief. She could no longer speak, but when the Archbishop told her stories of the afterlife, she squeezed his hand as if she understood and agreed. When the time came, her loved ones left her in the care of the ladies, and the Queen fell into a deep sleep and left this world in the early hours of the 24th of March. Before she left, Elizabeth made it clear that she did not wish her body to be open for embalming. But Robert Cecil did not wait. He gave the order to the surgeons and hurried to London to proclaim James VI as the new king. So her body was embalmed and placed in an oak coffin lined with lead. Elizabeth lay in state in a chapel in Richmond for some time before being transferred to a ship and taken to Whitehall Palace. Her faithful maid of honor, Elizabeth Southwell, watched over the velvet-wrapped coffin and said that, despite the embalming, a cracking sound could be heard in the coffin. It sounded as if gas was pressing against the walls. At the funeral, which was a grand affair, the coffin was carried by 4 horses wrapped in black. On them lay the image of the Queen in full regalia, with crown and scepter. The nobles carried 12 banners with coats of arms, and behind them came hundreds of people, from commoners to nobles. The streets were crowded with those who came to pay homage to the Queen who ruled with wisdom and love. When they saw her lifelike image, many could not hold back their tears. The nation's grief was immense as she became one of England's greatest queens. And everyone realized what an incredible queen they had lost.